Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content is provided strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. It does not constitute legal, financial, or psychological advice. Divorce is a complex legal and social process with significant variations across different state jurisdictions and individual circumstances. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals, such as family law attorneys, financial advisors, or licensed therapists, before making any decisions related to their marital status or legal standing. The historical trends and case studies discussed herein are intended to illustrate sociological concepts and do not predict specific outcomes for any individual. Every 60 seconds in the United States, another marriage dissolves. While you are watching this introduction, approximately 3 American couples who once stood before friends and family to pledge eternal devotion are now signing papers that legally sever their lives. We have been told for decades that 50% of all marriages end in divorce, a statistic so ubiquitous it has become a cultural cliché. But what if I told you that this number is not only misleading, but that it masks a much more volatile reality? We are currently living through a sociological great divide, where your education level, your zip code, and even the decade your parents were born are more predictive of your marital success than true love ever was. In the next few minutes, we are going to peel back the layers of the American domestic dream to reveal the invisible machinery of sociology that dictates who stays together and who breaks apart. We are moving beyond the tabloid headlines and the celebrity breakups to look at the cold, hard data of why the American family is being fundamentally restructured. This is not just a story about heartbreak. It is a story about economics, legislative shifts, and a radical change in the very definition of what it means to be an individual in the 21st century. This masterclass is designed to solve one of the most pressing intellectual puzzles of our time. Why did the most stable institution in human history become so fragile in the span of a single generation? By the end of this deep dive, you will understand the hidden forces of expressive individualism that drive our modern desires, the independence effect that changed the power dynamics of the American household, and the historical pivot points that turned divorce from a social death sentence into a common rite of passage. Whether you are interested in the legal evolution of the family court system, the economic impact of the silver tsunami among aging boomers, or the sociological contagion that can sweep through a social circle, this series will provide the roadmap. We are going to examine the potential outcomes of current demographic shifts and use case studies to illustrate how the American divorce rate is actually a mirror reflecting our deepest national values. To understand where we are, we must first define the sociological lens through which we are viewing this phenomenon. In the mid-20th century, the prominent sociologist C. Wright Mills introduced the concept of the sociological imagination. He argued that we must distinguish between personal troubles and public issues. When one couple gets divorced, it is a personal trouble, a private matter of incompatibility or infidelity. But when 50% of a population sees their marriages end, it becomes a public issue, a structural shift in the society itself. We are moving away from the institutional marriage of the 19th and early 20th centuries, where the union was a functional economic and reproductive unit designed for survival, toward what sociologists call the individualized marriage. In this modern framework, the marriage is only considered successful as long as it provides personal fulfillment and self-actualization for both partners. This shift did not happen in a vacuum. It was propelled by the no-fault revolution of the 1970s. Prior to 1969, if you wanted a divorce in the United States, you had to prove fault. This meant providing evidence of adultery, cruelty, or abandonment. This created a high barrier to entry for the divorce market, often forcing couples to engage in collusive adultery, where they would hire photographers to take staged photos of one partner in a hotel room with a stranger just to satisfy the court's requirements for a decree. When California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act of 1969, it triggered a domino effect across the country. By removing the requirement for blame, the legal system acknowledged a new sociological reality, that a marriage could simply die from irreconcilable differences. However, looking at historical trends, we see that the spike in divorce rates that followed was not just about the law. It was about the independence effect. As women entered the labor force in record numbers during the 1970s and 80s, the economic necessity of marriage began to erode. From a sociological conflict theory perspective, marriage has historically been an institution of power imbalance. When one partner holds all the economic capital, The other partner is structurally incentivized to remain in the relationship, regardless of its quality. As women's median earnings rose and their access to higher education expanded, the opportunity cost of leaving an unhappy marriage decreased. Sociologists measure this through the correlation between female labor force participation and divorce rates, noting that while the income effect, having more money in the house, can sometimes stabilize a marriage by reducing financial stress, the independence effect often outweighs it by providing a viable exit strategy. We also need to address the education gap in modern American divorce, which is perhaps the most significant sociological development of the last 20 years. Historical trends show that in the 1970s, divorce rates were relatively similar across all educational backgrounds. Today, that is no longer true. We are seeing a marriage divide, where college-educated Americans are seeing their divorce rates plummet to levels not seen since the 1960s, while those with a high school diploma or less continue to experience high levels of marital instability. This leads us to the luxury good hypothesis of marriage. In contemporary America, a stable lifelong marriage is increasingly becoming a hallmark of the upper middle class, supported by dual high-income streams, outsourced domestic labor, and the social capital that comes with professional networks. As we progress through this deep dive, we will analyze how these structural forces create a social contagion effect. Sociological studies have suggested that divorce can be contagious within social networks. If a close friend gets divorced, your own probability of divorcing increases by an estimated 75%. If a friend of a friend gets divorced, the probability still increases by 33%. This is not because of a lack of commitment, but because the divorce of a peer alters the social script. It provides a template for how to handle marital dissatisfaction and reduces the social stigma associated with the act. We are not just making these choices in isolation. We are reacting to the tectonic plates of the culture shifting beneath our feet. Over the course of this series, we will break down the specific data points of the gray divorce phenomenon, where adults over 50 are now the fastest growing demographic in the divorce courts, and we will examine the sociological impact on the generation of divorced children who are now forming their own families. We are going to look at the potential outcomes of these shifts and ask the hard question: is the American family falling apart? Or is it simply evolving into something we haven't yet learned how to name? To understand this evolution, we must look at the invisible financial scaffolding that holds the modern American home together, or in many cases becomes the weight that brings it down. In the year 2026, the economic reality of the American household has shifted significantly from the era of our parents. We have transitioned into what sociologists call the two-income trap. Historical trends indicate that while the dual income model was once a path to upward mobility, it has now become a requirement for baseline survival in major metropolitan areas. This creates a high-stakes environment where the marriage is no longer just an emotional bond, but a complex corporate merger. When that merger fails, the liquidation process is often more catastrophic than the emotional fallout. Imagine a couple named Marcus and Elena living in a suburb outside of Atlanta in 2026. Marcus works in cybersecurity, and Elena is a mid-level manager in healthcare logistics. On paper, they are the success story of the American dream. However, their marriage is anchored by a 3% mortgage rate they secured years ago, which is now their greatest source of conflict. In the current economic climate, neither of them can afford to buy the other out of the house, and neither can afford a comparable rental on a single income given the 2026 housing inventory. This phenomenon is what sociologists are now calling economic incarceration. They are effectively trapped in a dead marriage by the sheer cost of living independently. This structural pressure creates a unique form of domestic friction where every minor argument is amplified by the feeling of being caged by interest rates and inflation. In this scenario, the decision to divorce is no longer a matter of simply falling out of love. It is a calculated risk assessment involving the division of depreciating assets and the management of massive student loan portfolios. Case studies from the early 2020s showed that financial stress is the leading predictor of marital dissolution, but by 2026, it is not just the lack of money that causes the split. It is the management of complexity. When Marcus and Elena look at their potential outcomes, they see a 40% reduction in their standard of living. This leads to the rise of the birdnesting arrangement, a sociological trend where the parents rotate in and out of the family home to maintain stability for the children, while living in a separate studio apartment during their off weeks. This is a radical restructuring of the nuclear family that moves us away from the traditional clean break and into a state of perpetual, shared domesticity even after the legal papers are signed. This brings us to the technological catalyst. We cannot discuss the sociology of divorce in 2026 without addressing the impact of the perpetual search engine. In previous decades, your social circle was limited to your physical proximity, coworkers, neighbors, and friends of friends. Today, the digital landscape has created a permanent state of social comparison. Sociologists refer to this as the alternatives effect. When Elena has a difficult day with Marcus, her smartphone offers an endless curated stream of potential alternatives. The algorithm doesn't just show her shoes or cars. It shows her a version of a life she could be leading with someone else who appears more compatible, more successful, or more emotionally available. This creates a psychological environment where the grass is not just greener on the other side. The grass is being hyper-targeted to her specific emotional vacancies by a machine learning model. Historical trends in data usage show that the average American spends over 7 hours a day consuming digital content. This creates a phenomenon known as digital infidelity, which has become one of the primary drivers of divorce in 2026. This isn't always about physical affairs. It is about the redirection of emotional labor away from the partner and toward a screen. When we look at case studies of high-conflict divorces, we see a recurring theme. One partner felt replaced by an algorithm. The sociological impact is a thinning of the marital bond. If the marriage is an individualized project designed for self-actualization, then the moment a digital platform provides a more efficient route to that self-actualization, the marriage is viewed as an obsolete technology. Furthermore, we must examine the secularization of the union. For centuries, the primary stabilizing force of marriage was social and religious stigma. In 2026, that stigma has largely evaporated in the American mainstream. Marriage has moved from being a sacred covenant to a consumer contract. In a consumerist society, when a product no longer serves its purpose, the rational actor seeks to replace it. This shift in the internal logic of the relationship means that the threshold for leaving has dropped. We are no longer asking, "Is this marriage tolerable?" Instead, we are asking, "Is this marriage the best possible use of my time and emotional resources?" This is the opportunity cost of marriage. We are also seeing the emergence of the silver tsunami in a way we never anticipated. Divorce rates for those over the age of 50, often called gray divorce, have tripled in recent years. Take the case study of a couple like Robert and Susan, who are celebrating their 40th anniversary in 2026. Their children are grown, their careers are winding down, and they find themselves looking at each other across a kitchen table with 30 more years of life expectancy ahead of them. In 1950, a 60-year-old was considered to be in the twilight of their life. In 2026, a 60-year-old is often healthy, active, and looking for a new chapter. The sociological shift here is the rejection of the companionate marriage in favor of late-life autonomy. For Robert and Susan, the potential outcomes of staying together, decades of quiet resentment, outweigh the fear of being alone. They are part of a generation that is redefining the end-of-life social structure, choosing to liquidate retirement accounts and divide properties, rather than wait out the clock. This brings us to a critical junction in our deep dive. If the economic, technological, and social forces are all pushing toward higher rates of dissolution, how is the legal system evolving to catch up? In Part 1, we touched on the no-fault revolution, but in 2026, we are entering the era of predictive jurisprudence. Artificial intelligence is now being used to suggest settlement splits based on thousands of similar cases, theoretically removing the human bias of a judge. But as the legal process becomes more automated, the human cost becomes more abstract. We are witnessing a transition where the divorce court is becoming a data processing center. As we look toward the next phase of this masterclass, we have to confront the most controversial aspect of this entire sociological shift. We have talked about the parents, the money, and the apps. But what happens when the legal system fails to account for the emotional complexity of the next generation? We are currently observing a massive social experiment on the long-term effects of the fragmented home. But is the traditional two-parent household actually the gold standard we think it is? Or is the 2026 model of the multi-household family actually creating more resilient children? In the next part, we are going to dive into the psychological architecture of the divorce industrial complex and uncover how the very system designed to protect the family might be the one causing its most permanent scars. What happens when the state becomes a third party in your bedroom? The answer will change everything you think you know about American liberty. To understand the state as a third party in the American bedroom, we have to look at the legal architecture that governs the dissolution of a family in 2026. When a couple like James and Sarah, living in the high-density suburbs of Northern Virginia, decides to file for a divorce, they are doing more than just ending a romantic relationship. They are triggering a massive bureaucratic apparatus known as the divorce industrial complex. This is a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem composed of attorneys, forensic accountants, court-appointed mediators, child psychologists, and guardian ad litem representatives. Historical trends indicate that as the definition of family has become more fluid, the legal system has become more rigid and invasive to compensate for the lack of traditional social norms. Imagine if your most private disagreements, how you spend your Saturday mornings, what your children eat for lunch, or how much you contribute to a college fund, were suddenly subject to the scrutiny of a government official. This is the reality of the 2026 family court system. Under the legal doctrine of parens patriae, which literally means father of the country, the state possesses the inherent power and authority to protect those who are legally unable to act on their own behalf. In the context of a divorce, this means the state effectively becomes the ultimate parent. If James and Sarah cannot agree on a parenting plan, a judge who has never met their children and has only seen a snapshot of their lives through curated legal briefs will make the final decision. This is a profound shift in the sociological concept of parental sovereignty. The divorce industrial complex thrives on conflict. From a sociological perspective, the adversarial nature of the American legal system is often at odds with the emotional requirements of a family in transition. In 2026, the average cost of a contested divorce involving children has climbed significantly. We are seeing case studies where the entire net worth of a middle-class family, the equity in their home, their 401k savings, and their children's education funds, is liquidated to pay for expert witnesses and legal fees. The potential outcomes of this are a generation of what sociologists call the new poor. Individuals who were firmly middle class during their marriage, but find themselves below the poverty line once the legal system has finished the process of asset division. Let's look at the step-by-step details of how this state intervention unfolds. It begins with the request for production. In this phase, James and Sarah must reveal every digital and physical footprint of their existence. Their text messages, their browser histories, their GPS data from their cars, and their spending habits are all laid bare. In 2026, this often includes AI-driven sentiment analysis of their communication over the last 5 years to determine who is the more stable parent. This level of surveillance would be considered a violation of civil liberties in almost any other context, but within the confines of the family court, it is standard procedure. Once the data is collected, the psychological architecture of the split begins to take shape. This is where we see the best interests of the child standard in action. While the phrase sounds noble, sociologists argue it is a sociological black box. There is no universal definition of what is best for a child. Is it the stability of staying in the same house, even if it means one parent is financially ruined? Is it the presence of both parents equally, even if they live 2 hours apart? In 2026, the court often appoints a guardian ad litem, a third-party attorney whose only job is to represent the child. This creates a strange sociological triangle where the child's representative may have a different vision for the family than either parent. This brings us to the phenomenon of the intergenerational transmission of divorce. We have decades of data suggesting that children of divorced parents are statistically more likely to experience divorce themselves. However, the 2026 perspective on this is shifting. Sociologists are now looking at the modeling of conflict resolution. It isn't the divorce itself that transmits the risk. It is the exposure to the adversarial legal process. When children see their parents being reduced to plaintiffs and defendants, they learn a script for human relationships that is based on litigation rather than negotiation. They witness the state being used as a weapon, and they internalize the idea that the only way to resolve a deep emotional conflict is through a third-party authority. To see this in practice, consider the case study of a family in 2026 navigating a custody evaluation. A state-licensed evaluator enters the home. They perform what is essentially a social audit. They check the refrigerator for nutritional balance. They observe the way James speaks to his daughter. They interview teachers and neighbors. This is the ultimate expression of the state as a third party. The private sphere of the home, which was once protected by the Fourth Amendment, becomes a public record. The sociological impact is a profound sense of institutional betrayal. The family, which is supposed to be a refuge from the world, becomes a site of state-managed regulation. But why does this system persist? From a functionalist perspective in sociology, the divorce industrial complex serves a purpose. It provides a structured, if flawed, way to redistribute resources and ensure that children do not become a burden on the state. However, from a conflict theory perspective, this system benefits a professional class of conflict managers at the expense of the family unit. We are seeing the rise of collaborative law and private mediation in 2026 as a direct reaction to this. Wealthier families are now opting out of the public court system entirely, hiring private judges and mediators to keep their lives out of the public record. This creates a two-tiered system of American justice: private, dignified dissolution for those who can afford it, and public, adversarial litigation for everyone else. As we look at the psychological scars left by this process, we have to talk about the concept of ambiguous loss. This is a sociological term for a loss that occurs without closure or clear understanding. When a parent is forced out of a home by a court order, the children experience a form of mourning for someone who is still alive but functionally absent. In 2026, the prevalence of joint physical custody is at an all-time high, but the quality of that time is often strained by the lingering trauma of the legal battle. We are creating a society of relational nomads, children who move between two worlds every few days, never fully belonging to either. The deeper we go into this masterclass, the more we see that divorce is not just the end of a contract. It is a fundamental reconfiguration of the human soul under the pressure of the law. But as the state takes a larger role in defining the family, a new crisis is emerging. While the legal system focuses on the division of what exists, it is failing to account for the massive economic vacuum created in the wake of the split. What happens when the two-income trap we discussed earlier suddenly becomes a two-household nightmare? In the next part, we are going to look at the economic aftershocks and the gender wealth gap of 2026. We will uncover the invisible tax of being single, and why the most dangerous financial move an American can make is not a bad investment, but a legal separation. Are you prepared for the divorce penalty that the government doesn't want to talk about? The numbers will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about financial security. The financial reality of a 2026 divorce begins the moment one partner moves their biometric data and personal cloud off the shared family server. This is the start of the divorce penalty, a structural economic drain that sociologists and economists have been tracking with increasing alarm. To understand why this is the most dangerous financial move an American can make, we have to look at the loss of the economy of scale. In a standard American household in 2026, two people living together spend significantly less than two people living apart, even if their total combined income remains exactly the same. Historical trends show that a single person requires approximately 70% of the income a couple needs to maintain an identical standard of living. This 20% efficiency gap is the silent killer of middle-class wealth. Imagine a case study involving David and Chloe. They have been married for 12 years and live in a high-cost area like Austin, Texas. In 2026, their combined household income is $185,000. Together, they share one mortgage, one set of utility bills, one high-speed satellite internet subscription, and they buy groceries in bulk from wholesale clubs. When they decide to separate, that $185,000 is immediately cleaved. But the expenses do not divide neatly by two. David moves into a one-bedroom apartment where the rent is $2,400 a month. Chloe stays in the family home, but she is now responsible for a $3,800 mortgage on her own. Suddenly, $6,200 a month is going toward housing alone. As before, it was only $3,800. This is the two-household nightmare. Over a single year, this couple has effectively burned an extra $28,800 just to exist in separate spaces. This is money that is no longer going into their 401ks, their children's college funds, or the local economy. Step by step, the divorce penalty manifests in the invisible tax of singlehood. Let us look at the 2026 tax landscape. When David and Chloe were married and filing jointly, they benefited from wider tax brackets and a higher standard deduction. Upon their legal separation, they are pushed into the single filer status. For many Americans in this income bracket, this results in a higher effective tax rate on every dollar earned. They are essentially paying a premium to the government for the privilege of being unmarried. Furthermore, their insurance premiums skyrocket. In 2026, insurance companies use sophisticated risk modeling algorithms that often categorize single, divorced individuals as higher risk than their married counterparts. Their car insurance, health insurance, and even life insurance policies lose the multi-line or spousal discounts, adding an estimated $1,500 to $3,000 in annual overhead. The gender wealth gap adds another layer of sociological complexity, to this economic aftershock. While the 2020s have seen a move toward more equitable alimony and child support structures, the long-term potential outcomes remain gendered. Historical trends indicate that women often experience a sharper immediate drop in household income following a divorce, sometimes as much as 30 to 40%. Chloe, for instance, might have taken a 3-year career hiatus or shifted to a part-time remote role to manage the household during the children's early years. In 2026, the cost of re-entering the hyper-competitive, AI-integrated workforce at her previous salary level is immense. She faces what sociologists call the mommy track penalty, which is amplified during a divorce. David, on the other hand, might see his disposable income decrease due to child support payments, but his career trajectory remains uninterrupted. However, David faces a different sociological risk: the bachelor's burnout. Without the domestic support and emotional regulation provided by the marital unit, many men in 2026 see a decline in their professional productivity and health, which eventually impacts their earning potential. We see a recurring pattern in case studies where divorced men spend significantly more on convenience services, food delivery, laundry services, and outsourced cleaning, because they never developed the domestic labor skills that were previously managed by their wives. This is a transfer of wealth from the individual to the gig economy. Then there is the liquidation of the future. The division of retirement assets is perhaps the most devastating part of the divorce industrial complex. In 2026, many couples find that their primary source of wealth, outside of home equity, is their 401k or IRA. To divide these, the court issues a Qualified Domestic Relations Order, or QDRO. This legal instrument allows for the tax-free transfer of retirement funds from one spouse to another, but it cannot fix the math of compounding interest. If David has $400,000 in a retirement account at age 45 and is forced to give Chloe $200,000, he hasn't just lost half his money. He has lost the exponential growth of that $200,000 over the next 20 years. By the time he reaches 65, that single legal signature will have cost him over $800,000 in projected future value, assuming a modest 7% return. Chloe is in the same boat. She receives the $200,000, but she often has to tap into it early to cover the immediate costs of her new, more expensive single life, incurring massive tax penalties and further eroding her long-term security. We are also seeing the emergence of the divorce debt trap. In 2026, with interest rates remaining stubborn and consumer credit at an all-time high, many couples are financing their legal battles through high-interest credit lines. They are essentially gambling with their future to settle their past. This leads to a sociological phenomenon where the post-divorce identity is defined by financial scarcity. The stress of this debt often leads to a second wave of sociological issues: social isolation, increased reliance on state services, and a decline in the quality of parenting. The economic aftershock is not just a line on a balance sheet. It is a fundamental shift in how these individuals interact with the world. As we look deeper, we must ask, if the financial cost is so high, why is the rate of dissolution still so significant in 2026? This is where the sociology of the individualized marriage meets the reality of the digital market. We have built a society where we are told that our personal happiness is the ultimate currency, but we are finding that this currency has very little purchasing power in a two-household economy. We are trading long-term structural stability for short-term emotional relief, and the divorce penalty is the interest we pay on that trade. But the economic impact is just the beginning. The most profound changes are happening in the way we view our very selves. When the household fractures and the money is divided, the individual is forced to rebuild an identity from the ruins of a shared life. In the next part of this masterclass, we are going to explore the sociology of the new identity and the rise of the single-parent superpower. We will look at how the 2026 landscape is creating a new class of hyper-resilient, but deeply exhausted individuals. We will also uncover the dark side of the rebound culture, where the algorithms we discussed earlier are waiting to plug the emotional and financial holes left by the divorce. What happens when your next relationship is curated by the same data that predicted your last one would fail? The answer lies in the psychological machinery of the modern dating market, and it is more calculated than you can imagine. To understand the psychological machinery of the modern dating market, we must first look at the wreckage of the identity that preceded it. In the year 2026, when a marriage ends, the individual does not just lose a partner, they lose a social orientation. Sociologists refer to this through the lens of symbolic interactionism, specifically the concept of the looking glass self. developed by Charles Horton Cooley. This theory suggests that our sense of self is shaped by how we perceive others see us. For 10, 20, or 30 years, a person's primary mirror was their spouse. When that mirror is shattered, the individual enters a state of identity-suspended animation. This is the starting point for the sociology of the new identity, a process that in 2026 is being hyper-accelerated by digital culture and the aggressive commodification of personal reinvention. Imagine a character named Kevin, a 42-year-old software architect in Chicago. After his divorce was finalized in early 2026, Kevin found himself in a sociological vacuum. For a decade, he was Kevin the husband, Kevin the suburban neighbor, and Kevin of Kevin and Sarah. When he moved into a high-rise downtown, those labels evaporated. In previous decades, a man in Kevin's position might have drifted into social isolation. But in 2026, the market is waiting for him. The moment Kevin's digital footprint, his change of address, his sudden surge in solo grocery purchases, and his legal searches flagged him as single, the algorithm shifted. This is the rebound culture 2.0. Kevin is immediately targeted by the optimization industry. His social media feeds are flooded with advertisements for high-intensity fitness programs, wardrobe consultation services, and AI-driven charisma coaching. This is what sociologists call the performance of the self. Kevin is encouraged to view his divorce not as a tragedy, but as a brand relaunch. He spends thousands of dollars on a revenge body, a concept that has evolved from a petty emotional reaction into a billion-dollar sector of the wellness economy. The sociological implication here is profound. We are teaching individuals that the cure for a broken social bond is an increase in market value. We are telling Kevin that if he can become a more desirable product, the pain of his previous failure will be neutralized. However, beneath this veneer of self-improvement lies the dark side of the rebound culture. Case studies in 2026 show that the average time between a legal separation and the creation of a new dating profile has shrunk to less than 3 weeks. This is driven by what sociologists call the narcissistic injury of divorce. To soothe the sting of rejection or the weight of failure, individuals seek immediate external validation. Enter the 2026 dating apps, which now use predictive vulnerability scoring. These platforms know that a recent divorcee is statistically more likely to spend more time on the app and purchase premium features in a desperate search for connection. Kevin isn't just looking for love. He is looking for a digital analgesic. The app's algorithm detects his erratic usage patterns, late-night swiping, high responsiveness to specific archetypes, and curates a stream of matches designed to keep him engaged rather than to find him a compatible partner. While Kevin is navigating the dating market, we must look at the other side of the 2026 divorce experience, the rise of the single-parent superpower. Consider the case study of Vanessa, a 35-year-old mother of 2 in Seattle. Unlike Kevin, who has the luxury of a downtown bachelor pad, Vanessa is navigating the logistical nightmare of the split household. In 2026, the sociological expectation of intensive parenting has not diminished. It has doubled. Vanessa is expected to maintain the same level of extracurricular involvement, academic oversight, and emotional support for her children, while operating with half the resources and double the exhaustion. Vanessa's identity is forged in the furnace of logistical mastery. She manages a shared family calendar that looks like a tactical flight plan. She uses AI-integrated co-parenting apps that monitor the tone of her messages to her ex-husband to ensure they remain compliant with their court-mandated civil communication protocols. This is the institutionalization of the private life. Vanessa has become hyper-resilient, developing a set of project management skills that would rival a Fortune 500 CEO. But this resilience comes with a hidden cost: the erosion of the spontaneous self. Every minute of Vanessa's life is accounted for, leaving no room for the very self-actualization that the individualized marriage was supposed to provide. Sociologists are observing a phenomenon in 2026 called the second shift divergence. While the two-income household shared the domestic labor, however unequally, the single-parent household experiences no such distribution. Vanessa is experiencing the absolute limit of human agency. Historical trends show that this level of sustained stress often leads to a sociological burnout, where the individual withdraws from the community to focus solely on the survival of the nuclear unit. This weakens the broader social fabric, as single parents have less time for civic engagement, volunteering, or even maintaining deep friendships. Furthermore, we must address the gendered algorithmic experience. While Kevin is being sold self-improvement and high-status dating, Vanessa is being targeted with advertisements for convenience, meal kits, automated cleaning robots, and stress relief supplements. The market reinforces their sociological roles. Kevin is encouraged to be a consumer of experiences. Vanessa is encouraged to be a consumer of efficiency. Their new identities are being constructed not in the vacuum of their own choices, but in the reflection of a market that sees their divorce as a segmented data point. This leads us to the most unsettling aspect of the 2026 identity: the quantified heart. When Kevin finally finds a new partner, the relationship is often mediated by the same data that governed his divorce. There are now services that allow individuals to run a compatibility audit using the data exported from their previous marriage's shared accounts. Imagine if Kevin and his new partner, Maya, could see a predictive model of their potential outcomes based on their combined spending habits, sleep cycles, and communication styles. In 2026, this isn't science fiction. It's a premium subscription. The sociology of divorce has led to a society that is terrified of the unknown. We are trying to use data to insure ourselves against the risk of future heartbreak. But what does this do to the nature of human connection? If we are only entering relationships that the algorithm deems safe, are we losing the very vulnerability that makes a marriage work in the first place? We are building a world of hyper-optimized individuals who are too resilient to be hurt, but perhaps too guarded to be truly known. We have replaced the sacred mystery of the union with the cold certainty of the spreadsheet. As Part 5 of this masterclass concludes, we have seen how the legal and economic systems of 2026 fracture the self, and how the digital market attempts to glue it back together in its own image. But we have been focusing largely on the adults. There is a whole other population living in the shadow of these shifts. What happens to the children who grow up in this world of split screens, biometric co-parenting, and algorithmic dating? Are they becoming the most adaptable generation in history, or are we witnessing the birth of a new kind of psychological detachment? In the next part, we are going to dive into the split-screen generation. We will look at the long-term sociological effects of the dual household childhood and uncover the startling data on how 2020 SIXS children are redefining the very concept of home. Is the traditional family unit truly dead? Or is the next generation building something even more complex from the pieces? The answer lies in the bedrooms of 1 million divided homes across America. To understand the split-screen generation, we must look past the legal documents and into the physical and digital architecture of a child's life in 2026. In previous decades, a child of divorce was often defined by what they lacked: a stable home or a present parent. But in the contemporary American landscape, the sociology of the child has shifted from a model of deficit to a model of hyperadaptation. We are witnessing the rise of the translocal child, an individual who does not inhabit a single home, but rather exists in a state of perpetual transition between two distinct microcultures. This is not just a change in address. It is a fundamental restructuring of how a developing brain conceptualizes stability, authority, and the very idea of belonging. Imagine a 10-year-old named Leo living in a tech-forward suburb of Denver in 2026. For Leo, the concept of home is not a fixed geographic point, but a schedule synced to his smartwatch. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., a notification triggers a transition protocol. This is what sociologists call boundary ambiguity, but for Leo, it is simply the logistical reality of his existence. He maintains two complete sets of social identities. At his father's house, the culture is defined by high-intensity extracurriculars, a strict digital diet, and a specific set of linguistic cues. At his mother's apartment 3 miles away, the culture shifts toward expressive individualism, flexible scheduling, and a different set of dietary and social norms. Leo has become a master of code switching before he has even reached middle school. Historical trends in the early 2000s suggested that the primary trauma for children was the initial split. However, 2026 case studies indicate that the modern challenge is the chronic logistics of the dual household. Leo does not just move his body, he moves his digital footprint. His school accounts, his gaming profiles, and his biometric health data must all be accessible and consistent across two different networks. We are seeing a phenomenon known as the fragmented self-management. Children are now tasked with the emotional labor of maintaining the bridge between their parents. In many 2026 households, the child is the only person who actually knows what is happening in both environments. This places a massive cognitive load on the child, effectively forcing them into a role of a diplomatic courier. Step by step, we can observe how this affects the psychological architecture of the next generation. First, there is the ritual of the packing list. In 2026, this is rarely about clothes, which are often duplicated in both homes to reduce friction, but about the artifacts of identity. It is the specific laptop, the specialized sports gear, or the comfort object that has survived the transition. Sociologically, this creates an intense attachment to mobile property over fixed space. We are raising a generation of relational nomads who feel more comfortable in the movement between places than in the places themselves. Data from the 2026 National Institute of Child Health suggests that these children show higher scores in cognitive flexibility, but also report higher baseline levels of cortisol, the hormone associated with stress and hypervigilance. Furthermore, we must look at the digital bridge. In 2026, the concept of visitation has been replaced by perpetual presence. Through smart home cameras, shared cloud folders, and instant messaging, the absent parent is never truly gone. While this can provide a sense of security, it also creates a sociological phenomenon called the panopticon of parenting. The child is never truly alone in either environment. They are always potentially being observed or messaged by the parent who is not physically present. This blurs the boundaries of the household and prevents the child from fully immersing themselves in the current moment. Case studies of teenagers in 2026 show a rising trend of digital ghosting, where children intentionally disable their tracking or messaging apps to create a private space that neither parent can reach. The impact on future relationship modeling is perhaps the most significant long-term potential outcome. When a child like Leo grows up witnessing a marriage dissolve into a series of mediated legal and financial transactions, his view of love becomes contractual rather than covenantal. Sociologists are tracking a shift in the 2026 youth population toward what is called preemptive pragmatism. These young people view relationships through the lens of risk management. They are more likely to discuss prenuptial agreements before they even begin dating seriously, and they often view marriage not as a lifelong bond, but as a temporary alliance that can be dissolved once it no longer serves the individual's growth. This is the ultimate victory of expressive individualism over the institutional family. We also need to address the normalization of the split. In 1970, a child of divorce was a statistical outlier in the American classroom. In 2026, they are the plurality, if not the majority. This has led to the social contagion of divorce within peer groups. When a child's friends all live in dual households, the traditional two-parent home starts to look like the anomaly. This reduces the stigma, which is a positive for the child's self-esteem, but it also creates a feedback loop where the stability of the nuclear family is no longer reinforced by the peer group. The sociological script for a successful life has been rewritten to include the inevitable pivot of the midlife split. However, there is a counter-narrative emerging in 2026, the rise of the bonus family. This is the sociological term for the expanded network of step-parents, half-siblings, and social parents that form around the child of divorce. Take the case study of Maya, a 16-year-old in Chicago. Her family tree is not a trunk with branches, but a complex, multi-directional web. She has 4 parents, 2 biological and 2 through remarriage, and 3 sets of grandparents. From a functionalist perspective, Maya actually has more social capital than a child in a traditional home. She has access to a wider range of mentors, more financial resources in some cases, and a larger safety net. We are seeing the birth of the distributed family, a model that prioritizes the breadth of the network over the depth of the single unit. This brings us to a radical realization. The 2026 split-screen generation is not necessarily broken. They are the first generation to be fully native to the complexity of the modern world. They are learning to navigate bureaucracy, manage diverse emotional environments, and maintain digital identities across multiple platforms. They are becoming the ultimate citizens of a fragmented, high-speed society. But as they build these skills, they are also losing something fundamental. They are losing the experience of the uncontested home, the place where they do not have to be a diplomat, a courier, or a manager of their own identity. As we conclude Part 6, we have to ask, if the children are adapting to this new reality, who is looking out for the adults who are entering this complex world of remarriage and blended lives? The cycle doesn't end with the divorce decree. For many, it is just the beginning of an even more complicated sociological dance. What happens when the bonus family becomes a bonus conflict? In the next part, we are going to explore the sociology of remarriage and the blended family trap. We will uncover the data on why second and third marriages have even higher failure rates than the first, and we will look at the 2026 phenomenon of the serial monogamist. Are we doomed to repeat our mistakes, or is the system designed to make a second chance nearly impossible? The answer will force you to rethink everything you know about starting over. To understand why starting over is often more difficult than the first attempt, we have to look at the statistical anomaly of the second marriage. In the year 2026, while approximately 40 to 50% of first marriages in the United States end in divorce, that number jumps to nearly 60 or 67% for second marriages, and over 70% for third ones. This is what sociologists call the selection effect. It suggests that individuals who have already divorced once have already crossed a psychological Rubicon. They have proven to themselves that they can survive the dissolution of a marriage, which lowers the barrier to exiting a subsequent one. But beyond individual psychology, there is a massive structural weight known as the blended family trap that makes these second chances statistically precarious. Imagine a character named Michael, a 48-year-old middle manager living in Phoenix in 2026. Michael is entering his second marriage with Sarah, who also has 2 children from a previous relationship. On their wedding day, they aren't just joining 2 lives. They are merging 2 complex, pre-existing ecosystems with their own established rules, histories, and financial obligations. This is the sociology of the blended family. Unlike the first marriage, which typically begins as a clean slate, a second marriage in 2026 is often a high-stakes negotiation between 4 adults, multiple children, and at least 2 separate legal jurisdictions. The first point of failure in the blended family trap is the lack of a social script. For the traditional nuclear family, society provides a clear set of expectations. For a blended family, those scripts are absent or contradictory. Michael finds himself in a position where he is expected to provide financial support for Sarah's children, but has no legal authority to discipline them. He is a parental figure, yet a stranger. This role ambiguity creates a constant state of low-level friction. Case studies in 2026 show that the primary driver of conflict in second marriages is not the couple themselves, but the external stressors of step-parenting and co-parenting with ex-spouses. Step by step, we see how the logistics of the reconstituted home erode the marital bond. Michael and Sarah must manage a calendar that involves 3 different school districts and 4 different holiday schedules. In 2026, this is managed through AI-driven synchronization apps, but technology cannot solve the emotional deficit. Every time Michael's ex-wife changes a pickup time, or Sarah's ex-husband refuses to pay for a soccer camp, the stress bleeds directly into Michael and Sarah's bedroom. They are constantly dealing with the ghosts of their previous marriages. Sociologists call this the boundary permeability problem. In a first marriage, the boundaries of the home are relatively firm. In a second marriage, those boundaries are constantly being breached by phone calls, legal emails, and the physical transition of children. Then there is the financial fragmentation. In Part 4, we discuss the divorce penalty, but in a second marriage, we see the alimony and child support drag. Michael is paying out 25% of his take-home pay to his first wife, while Sarah is receiving a fluctuating amount from her ex-husband. This creates an inherent power imbalance in their new household. They cannot simply pool their resources like a first-time couple. Michael often feels like he is working 2 jobs just to stay afloat, while Sarah feels the insecurity of depending on a man who is legally tethered to another woman's financial well-being. This leads to the phenomenon of separate purses, where second marriage couples keep their finances strictly divided to avoid the complexity of previous obligations. While this is the logical risk management strategy, historical trends suggest that couples who do not integrate their finances have a lower sense of shared identity and a higher rate of eventual split. We also have to address the serial monogamist. In 2026, the ease of digital dating has created a demographic of individuals who move from one intense, long-term relationship to another, without ever addressing the underlying sociological patterns of their behavior. This is the attachment loop. Case studies of serial divorcees often reveal a pattern of high-intensity entry. Because they are eager to prove that their first failure was a fluke, they accelerate the milestones of the second relationship, moving in together, merging lives, or getting married within 18 months. Sociologists warn that this acceleration prevents the stress testing necessary for long-term stability. By the time the honeymoon phase ends in 2026, the structural realities of the blended family hit with the force of a tidal wave. Furthermore, we must look at the impact of the bonus grandparent. In a 2026 blended family, the social network expands exponentially. Michael's parents are now step-grandparents to Sarah's children. This creates a dilution of social capital. Wealth and inheritance in America are traditionally passed down through biological lines. When Michael and Sarah try to plan for their future, they face the delicate and often taboo subject of estate planning. Do Michael's biological children get more than Sarah's? How do they handle the family home? In a world of increasing economic scarcity, these questions aren't just theoretical. They are the front lines of familial conflict. The potential outcomes of these disputes often lead to the alienation of adult children, further destabilizing the marriage as the parents age. There is also the sociological concept of the incomplete institution. First coined by sociologist Andrew Cherlin, this theory argues that remarriage is an incomplete institution because we haven't developed the language or the laws to support it. In 2026, if Michael's stepson has a medical emergency while Michael is the only one home, Michael may face legal hurdles in authorizing treatment despite living with the child for years. This institutional lag makes the members of a blended family feel like they are constantly operating in a gray area. They are sort of a family, sort of parents, and sort of related. This lack of concrete status leads to a psychological state of unbelonging, which is a primary predictor of marital dissatisfaction. As we analyze these layers, it becomes clear that the second marriage is not just a repeat of the first. It is a different species of relationship entirely. It requires a level of emotional intelligence, legal literacy, and financial discipline that the average American is rarely prepared for. The system is not necessarily designed to make a second chance impossible, but it is certainly designed to make it more expensive, both emotionally and financially. But as we look at the rising rates of these reconstituted failures, we have to look even deeper. What if the problem isn't just the structure of the family? What if the very way we communicate in 2026 is fundamentally incompatible with the long-term survival of a marriage? We have talked about the law, the money, and the kids, but we haven't talked about the language of conflict. In the next part, we are going to explore the digital divorce, how social media and AI communication are rewriting the rules of the argument. We will look at how a single screenshot can end a 20-year union, and why the 2026 communication apps are actually making it harder for us to understand each other. Is your smartphone acting as a divorce lawyer in your pocket? You might be surprised at how much your device knows about your marriage's expiration date. The concept of the smartphone as a divorce lawyer in your pocket is not a metaphor in 2026. It is a measurable sociological reality. To understand how we arrived here, we must look at the transition from verbal conflict to digital record. In previous generations, an argument between spouses happened in the ephemeral space of the living room. Words were spoken, emotions flared, and eventually the air cleared. There was no transcript. Today, the sociology of the American argument has moved almost entirely onto encrypted messaging platforms and social media threads. This has created a phenomenon sociologists call the permanent evidence loop. Every frustrated text, every sarcastic retort, and every late-night vent to a friend is now a time-stamped, searchable, and admissible piece of data that fundamentally alters the power dynamics of the marriage. Imagine a character named Taylor, a 38-year-old marketing director in Seattle. In 2026, Taylor does not argue with her husband, Jordan, primarily through speech. They argue through asynchronous text bursts. When Jordan forgets a domestic responsibility, Taylor doesn't wait until he gets home. She sends a Slack-style message immediately. This creates a state of constant low-level conflict. Because the communication is text-based, the nuance of tone, the softening of a facial expression, and the empathy of physical presence are stripped away. What remains is a cold, hard string of characters that both parties reread and overanalyze. Sociologists observing this behavior note that the act of rereading a hostile text message re-triggers the stress response, preventing the emotional de-escalation that is vital for marital survival. Step by step, the technology begins to act as a predictive agent of dissolution. In 2026, the AI assistants integrated into our phones, the ones that suggest replies or finish our sentences, have been trained on massive datasets of human interaction. This leads to the phenomenon of algorithmic escalation. Imagine if Taylor is typing a message to Jordan. The predictive text engine, sensing the aggressive tone of her first 3 words, suggests completions that are equally sharp. The technology is not neutral. It is designed for engagement and efficiency, not for the preservation of a delicate interpersonal bond. Furthermore, there are now consumer-grade apps that analyze your communication patterns with your spouse. They track the ratio of positive to negative interactions, the frequency of response delays, and the use of what sociologists call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. By the time Taylor realizes she is unhappy, her phone has likely known for 6 months, based on the decline in her use of affectionate emojis and the increase in her searches for solo travel or apartment listings. Historical trends show that social media has moved from being a tool for connection to a tool for marital surveillance. In 2026, the concept of a private life is nearly obsolete. Taylor and Jordan's social circles are overlapping digital webs where every like, follow, and comment is a potential site of domestic friction. We are seeing a rise in case studies involving micro-infidelity. This isn't about physical affairs, but about the redirection of emotional energy toward digital ghosts, ex-partners, attractive strangers, or even AI influencers. The sociological impact is the erosion of the shared reality. If Jordan is spending 3 hours a night in a VR social space where he is perceived as a single, successful version of himself, his commitment to the messy, difficult reality of his marriage to Taylor diminishes. The digital world offers a frictionless alternative to the hard work of marriage. This brings us to the sociology of the screenshot. In the 2026 legal landscape, the screenshot is the new DNA evidence. Family law attorneys in the U.S. report that over 90% of their evidence now comes from social media and messaging apps. This has led to a psychological shift where spouses are constantly building a file on each other, even subconsciously. When Taylor feels a slight, she doesn't just process it, she captures it. This creates a defensive posture within the marriage. You cannot be truly vulnerable with a partner if you suspect that your words might one day be read aloud in a courtroom. The state of being on the record 24/7 is fundamentally incompatible with the psychological safety required for a long-term union. We are witnessing the death of the private mistake. Furthermore, the 2026 dating algorithm doesn't just wait for you to be single. It actively prepares the way. Sociologists have identified a trend called pre-exit priming. The algorithms on platforms like Instagram and TikTok are so sensitive to emotional shifts that they can detect when a user is in a declining relationship. They begin to serve content that reinforces the idea of the independent life, or shows success stories of people who left their partners. For Taylor, her feed becomes a curated advertisement for the life she could have without Jordan. This is the weaponization of the alternatives effect we discussed earlier. The machine isn't just reflecting her reality. It is nudging her toward a specific potential outcome that generates more data and more ad revenue for the platform, the highly active, newly single consumer. But there is an even deeper sociological shift happening, the outsourcing of intimacy. In 2026, many couples are using AI intermediaries to help them communicate. There are services that will rewrite your angry text to be more constructive, or provide talking points for difficult conversations. While this might seem helpful, it creates a layer of inauthenticity. If Taylor is using an AI to tell Jordan how she feels, Jordan is no longer married to Taylor. He is married to an optimized version of Taylor's digital avatar. This leads to a profound sense of loneliness within the marriage. You are living with the person, but you are interacting with a script. When the script fails, as it inevitably does during a crisis, the couple finds they have no raw, unmediated connection to fall back on. Case studies of 2026 divorces show that the primary complaint is no longer he cheated, or she spent all the money, but rather I don't know who this person is anymore. The digital layer has become so thick that the human beings beneath it have become strangers. We are seeing a rise in the silent divorce, where couples live together in a state of digital domesticity, sharing a Netflix account and a mortgage, but having zero emotional or physical intimacy. They are two data points living in the same coordinates. As we conclude Part 8, we have seen how the tools designed to connect us have become the very instruments used to dissect our marriages. The smartphone is indeed a lawyer, a judge, and a jury, all working in the background to document the expiration of the American home. But as these digital forces pull us apart, there is a final massive structural shift we must address. It's not about the individual, the kids, or the apps. It's about the very geography of America. Where you live is increasingly determining how you love and why you leave. In the next part, we are going to explore the sociology of the divorce zip code and the rise of the urban-rural marriage divide. We will uncover why some states are becoming divorce havens, and how the 2026 migration patterns are creating a new map of American heartbreak. Is your city making you more likely to get divorced? The geographic data is more predictive than you think. The geography of divorce in 2026 is no longer just a map of state lines. It is a map of sociological pressure cookers. To understand the sociology of the divorce zip code, we have to look at how physical space dictates domestic destiny. In America, your probability of marital dissolution is inextricably linked to the local economic ecosystem, the prevailing social norms of your immediate community, and the legislative climate of your state. We are seeing a massive divergence between what sociologists call the red state divorce pattern and the blue state divorce pattern. Contrary to popular belief, historical trends indicate that states with traditional conservative values often see higher rates of divorce, while secular, urban hubs see lower rates but a much higher barrier to entry for marriage itself. This is the great geographic paradox of American domestic life. Imagine a case study comparing two couples in 2026. First, we have Tyler and Ashley in a rural county in Oklahoma. They married at 21, shortly after high school, influenced by a community culture that prizes early family formation. However, their local economy is volatile, and their access to high-paying, remote-capable jobs is limited. In sociology, this is known as the structural vulnerability of early marriage. Because they married before their own identities and career paths were fully formed, and because they are living in a region with limited social safety nets, the external pressures on their marriage are immense. Now compare them to Julian and Claire in Brooklyn, New York. They did not marry until they were 34. They have dual high-income careers and a vast network of social services. While Julian and Claire are statistically less likely to divorce, it is not necessarily because they are more committed than Tyler and Ashley. It is because they have more protective factors built into their environment. Step by step, we can trace how a specific zip code exerts influence on a marriage. The first factor is the cost of exit. In 2026, some states have become what we call divorce havens due to their streamlined legal processes and predictable asset division laws. If you live in a state with a mandatory one-year separation period, like North Carolina, the friction of getting a divorce is high. This can lead to a phenomenon called marital limbo, where couples are emotionally separated, but legally bound for 365 days. Conversely, in states with shorter waiting periods, the impulse to exit is more easily facilitated by the law. This creates a sociological feedback loop. In areas where divorce is legally easier, it becomes more culturally normalized, which in turn reduces the social stigma and increases the likelihood that a struggling couple will choose to file. Furthermore, we must look at the urban-rural marriage divide through the lens of the marriage market theory. In a dense urban center like San Francisco or Chicago in 2026, the perceived abundance of alternatives is extremely high. This is the paradox of choice. When you are surrounded by thousands of potential partners who are just a swipe away, the perceived value of your current partner can be subject to constant, subconscious devaluation. In a rural zip code, the dating pool is smaller, which historically acted as a stabilizing force for existing marriages. However, the digital landscape of 2026 has obliterated these physical boundaries. Tyler in rural Oklahoma now has access to the same global dating pool as Julian in Brooklyn. This has created a sociological crisis in rural America. The instability of urban dating culture has been imported into communities that do not have the economic resources to handle the resulting fallout of broken homes. We also have to discuss the rise of the divorce migration. In 2026, we are seeing a significant number of individuals moving across state lines specifically to finalize a divorce or to start a new life where their alimony or child support payments will go further. This is the geographic arbitrage of divorce. Case studies show men and women moving from California or New York to the Sunbelt states like Florida, Texas, or Arizona, following a split. The sociological impact is the creation of single-parent colonies in specific zip codes where the cost of living is manageable on a single income. These neighborhoods become hubs of a new kind of social organization, where neighbors rely on each other for childcare and emotional support in ways that the traditional nuclear family once did. The data also reveals a startling correlation between commute times and divorce rates. In 2026, despite the rise of hybrid work, many Americans still face grueling commutes in congested corridors like Northern Virginia or Southern California. Sociologists have found that every 10 minutes added to a daily commute correlates with a measurable decrease in marital satisfaction. This is the time poverty of the American household. When a couple spends their prime energetic hours in traffic rather than with each other, the emotional bank account of the marriage is slowly drained. In these high-traffic zip codes, the home becomes merely a refueling station, rather than a place of connection. This structural exhaustion is a primary driver of the drift that leads to the divorce lawyer's office. Then there is the phenomenon of the neighborhood contagion. Sociological research suggests that divorce clusters. If you live in a cul-de-sac where two other families have recently separated, your own risk increases. This is because the visual and social cues of your environment change. You see the moving trucks, you see the parents taking turns with the kids, you see the new life being built. The social cost of divorce drops when you are surrounded by people who have already paid it. In 2026, this contagion is amplified by hyperlocal social apps like Nextdoor, where the drama of a neighborhood split is often discussed in public forums, turning a private tragedy into a community narrative. As we look at the potential outcomes of this geographic sorting, we see the emergence of a new social class. We are moving toward a country where marital stability is a geographic luxury. The stable zip codes are those with high levels of education, high homeownership rates, and high density of social services. The unstable zip codes are those being hollowed out by economic shifts and the erosion of local institutions like churches and civic clubs. Your zip code is effectively a risk profile for your marriage. It determines the quality of the schools your kids will go to if you split, the value of the house you will have to sell, and the social network that will either catch you or let you fall. But there is one final, overarching force that transcends geography, technology, and economics. It is the force that we started with, the law. But not just the law as it exists in the books, it's how the law is being reshaped by the very people who have gone through the system. In the final part of this deep dive, we are going to look at the future of the American Union. We will explore the rise of the beta marriage, the legal push for sunset clauses in marriage contracts, and the radical ways 2026 is reimagining the until death do us part vow. Are we moving toward a world where marriage is a renewable 5-year lease? The final chapter of the Sociology of Divorce will show you a future that is already arriving in the courtrooms of America. What happens when the ever after is no longer the goal, but the obstacle? The conclusion to this masterclass will change the way you look at every wedding you ever attend again. The concept of the ever after is undergoing a radical legislative and sociological deconstruction in 2026. We are witnessing the emergence of what sociologists call the term limited union. To understand this, we must look at the legal innovation of the sunset clause. Historically, marriage was a contract with no expiration date other than the death of a spouse. In the modern American courtroom, however, there is a growing movement toward the beta marriage. This is a legal framework where a couple agrees to a 5 or 10-year term of marriage. At the end of this term, the contract must be actively renewed, or it simply dissolves without the need for an adversarial divorce process. This is the ultimate expression of the individualized marriage we discussed in Part 1. It treats the union not as a permanent foundation, but as a flexible project that must provide ongoing value to remain viable. Imagine a couple in 2026 named Ethan and Mia, living in a progressive urban center like Seattle. When they marry, they include a formal sunset provision in their prenuptial agreement. This provision states that after 7 years, their legal obligations to one another will automatically terminate unless both parties sign a renewal. For Ethan and Mia, the ever after is not a goal. It is a burden that they have intentionally removed. Sociologically, this changes the entire internal pressure of the relationship. Instead of the complacency of the permanent, they exist in a state of perpetual recruitment. They must continuously earn the right to the next term. While this may sound like a recipe for anxiety, historical trends in 2026 data suggest that couples in term-limited agreements often report higher levels of intentionality and lower levels of the chronic resentment that leads to high-conflict splits. Step by step, we are seeing the rise of the divorce-proof contract. This is a sociological shift from status to contract. In the 19th century, marriage was a status you entered. In 2026, it is a contract you negotiate. We see this in the increasing granularity of lifestyle clauses. These are not the celebrity tabloid clauses about weight gain or frequency of intimacy, but rather structural agreements about career priority, geographic relocation, and domestic labor distribution. Case studies show that couples who use AI-driven mediation to draft these living documents are creating a new sociological script. They are acknowledging that the version of themselves that exists at age 25 will not be the same version that exists at 35. By building the exit into the entrance, they are paradoxically attempting to make the relationship more resilient. Furthermore, we must address the phenomenon of the post-family society. In 2026, the data indicates a sharp rise in sologamy and platonic co-parenting. We are seeing individuals who have watched the divorce industrial complex dismantle their parents' lives and have decided to bypass the romantic marriage model entirely. They are forming intentional communities where the legal and financial protections of marriage are distributed among a group of peers rather than concentrated in a single spouse. This is the decentralization of the family. From a functionalist perspective, these groups are performing the same duties as a traditional family, childcare, resource pooling, and emotional support, but without the single point of failure that a romantic divorce represents. In the year 2026, these chosen families are gaining legal recognition in several jurisdictions, allowing for multi-party health insurance and shared property rights. We also need to look at the impact of the longevity revolution. In 2026, advancements in healthcare have extended the active years of the average American significantly. When the "until death do us part" vow was popularized, the average life expectancy was 45 years. Marriage was often a 15-year sprint. Today it can be a 60-year marathon. Sociologists are now discussing the serial life phase. Just as we no longer expect a person to have one career for 40 years, we are beginning to question the sociological validity of having one partner for 60. This leads to the rise of the milestone divorce. These are separations that occur not because of conflict, but because a life phase has been completed. The children are raised, the careers are finished, and the individuals retire from the marriage to pursue a different version of themselves. This brings us to the radical concept of reproductive divorce. In 2026, with the rise of ectogenesis and advanced fertility technologies, the link between marriage and reproduction is being severed more deeply than ever before. We are seeing case studies of genetic partnerships, where individuals marry solely for the purpose of raising a child, with a prearranged legal plan to dissolve the marriage once the child reaches adulthood. This is the ultimate commodification of the family unit. The sociological impact is the creation of a purely functional household, stripped of the romantic expectations that often cause the most friction. It is a cold, calculated approach to the domestic dream, but for many who have witnessed the chaos of love, it represents a safe and predictable alternative. As we conclude this deep dive masterclass, we must look at the potential outcomes of these shifts on the American character. We are becoming a nation of contractual individuals. We are hyper-aware of our rights, our assets, and our exit strategies. We have replaced the social glue of stigma and tradition with the legal glue of mediation and data. While this has provided us with unprecedented personal freedom and the ability to leave toxic environments, it has also created a society characterized by a fragility of belonging. When everything is negotiable, nothing is foundational. The 2026 map of American heartbreak is not a map of failure. It is a map of a society in the midst of a painful metamorphosis. We are moving from a world where we were defined by who we were married to a world where we are defined by how we choose to live. The ever after hasn't disappeared. It has just been rebranded as "for now." As you look at the statistics, the data, and the case studies presented in this series, the question is no longer will my marriage last, but rather what is the purpose of my marriage in this current version of myself? We have explored the economy of the split, the psychology of the kids, the geography of the zip code, and the digital surveillance of our pockets. We have seen how the state, the algorithm, and the market have all become stakeholders in our most intimate spaces. The sociology of divorce in America is, ultimately, the sociology of the modern American self, a self that is highly mobile, deeply quantified, and perpetually seeking a better version of the dream. Whether this leads to a more resilient society or a more isolated one remains the great unanswered question of our decade. The tools are in our hands, but the script is still being written one decree at a time. Thank you for joining this masterclass. The evolution of the American family is far from over, and the data of tomorrow will be the reflection of the choices you make today.